All right. Welcome, everyone. Good to see some familiar faces and some new names. My name is Sarah McAllister. I am the Senior Associate Director here at the Office of Alumni Career and Professional Development. We have Nicole Bush, who is our Senior Director, and she will be all things tech support today. So if you have any issues with logging on, any kind of sound issues, feel free to just direct message her. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel where we have all of our past sessions. So feel free to subscribe so you get notified when new sessions are added. And if you want to just review the content, it will be up later this afternoon. So with that, I am so excited for our speaker today, Mike Thompson. We met about a year ago, maybe two. It was during our national networking night, global networking night a few years ago. And he has just been on my radar for this program for that long. And I am really excited to learn from him today. And actually, I'm going to just hand it over to you, Mike, to introduce yourself and to lead us through our session today. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, my pleasure, Sarah. This is a long time coming. We've been talking about this for some time, and I'm delighted we actually were able to finally put it together. So thank you, and thank Nicole also for allowing me to speak to my fellow alumni in this forum. So again, my name is Mike Thompson. I currently work at a diagnostic healthcare manufacturing company called Cepheid. The company's based in Northern California, but I'm a remote employee based in Los Angeles. And I graduated from Tulane a long time ago. And that'll be all you get out of me with regard to my graduation year. Anyway, I've worked for the most part of my career, at least for the last 20 years, in areas of learning and development and leadership development in different organizations. Hopefully you've seen the profile. Prior to that, I actually worked in academia and spent some time actually working at Tulane in the admissions office. And then also spent time at my graduate alma mater, the University of Virginia, where I did this kind of work. In fact, I worked with both students and alumni around career planning, career advice, resumes, interview skills, and so forth. So although I no longer work in that field today, I still have a passion for doing that kind of work. And as a hiring manager, I'm often thrust in positions where I'm being able to reflect on the job market, job search strategies. I've seen more than my fair share of resumes over the last couple of decades and interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of candidates, either for my own positions on my team or as an interviewer for positions in other departments where I can come in and provide some value. So I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to share with you some of my thinking and perspectives, particularly as it relates to the current market, which is a job market that we really have not seen before. On the one hand, I think it just offers really tremendous potential. I think there are some real, signs that we need to be concerned about, and I'll be talking about both those perspectives. I only have about 10 slides, and the purpose, I hope, of that short deck is to really create some dialogue. And so I'm going to encourage you all to chime in both during, if questions come up in the moment, my remarks, but certainly we'll have lots of time afterwards to not only entertain your questions, but hear your thoughts and perspectives. To do that, whatever is most comfortable for you, I would encourage, if you'd rather pop your questions into the chat, please do so. And Sarah's kindly agreed that she will monitor the chat and look for a way to politely interrupt me to get your question in. Or if you have something that you think is a burning question you want to ask in the moment, don't feel you have to wait. I would encourage you to use the hand feature, and then we'll make sure to capture that and stop and get your question. So that said, I am going to pull up my screen and get us started. And Sarah, if you can give me a quick nod as to whether you can see the slides. They up?
Looks good.
Great. Okay, perfect. Great. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, folks. So here are the objectives during this time, and I'll try to cover most of this in the first 30 minutes or even less, depending on how things go. I want to share with you some perspectives that I've seen as I follow these trends as they directly relate to the kind of roles I've had in organizations, particularly over the last few years, and particularly since the pandemic hit. I want to share some concerns. I think, although I feel very definitive that the overall market prospects, I think, for anyone looking for job change or career change is positive, there are some concerns. One of them I highlight that just was highlighted today in the news. You may have heard of it. And then I'll tell you from recruiters' perspective, because I talk to them often, what their biggest concerns are that you need to know. And then I'll talk about some opportunities I think that will position you well should you be looking to make changes, provide some really focused advice. I will encourage you as I share this advice with you to understand that this is my perspective. But if you're really mounting a job search, talk to other people. If you have experts that you know in this field, talk to as many people as you can. Yeah, we may all bring different perspectives to this work. And I think the more you get an opportunity to connect with lots of others, you'll get a more balanced view. But I'll share with you some of my own perspectives. And then I'll offer some advice about how to build an effective job search strategy. So our agenda will be, I'll share with you some data. I'm a data head. Although I majored in psychology as a Tulane student, I minored in math. I have an MBA from a very data-driven business program. So as long as I've been working in this field, I've always looked at data to help me understand the landscape. Much of what I'll talk about, as the title suggests, is really how do you leverage your strengths, make sure that you are positioning yourself effectively to prospective employers. I often feel that job candidates don't do strong enough work in really coming up with a strong value proposition. So I'll share that perspective with you as well. And then I'll differentiate what typically I think both recruiters and job seekers need to know about both we like to call the passive job search, which can be effective, but not nearly as effective as a more active job search. In doing so, I'll share a personal example very recently that reflects an approach that I've tried to do, particularly for those employers that I'm really interested in considering, including where I'm now. So anyway, I've got good news and bad news about job market. Here's the good news. Good news is that the economy is still growing, and job rates are growing. And in fact, as you look at the chart on the right, you can see that the number of job postings and offerings continues to grow and has grown for quite at least the most recent time. And at the same time, as a result of that, unemployment really has remained at historic lows. In a recent report by Deloitte, they highlighted the top 5 industries for jobs, and by no means am I encouraging you to pursue jobs in these fields, but just to give you a sense of where the job growth seems to be most strong. It's one in distribution. Think of Amazon. Although Amazon is really redefining itself now. They are no longer looking at themselves as a distribution company. They actually make more money from their web services business, AWS, than they do their distribution list or business, because distribution margins are very, very small. But still, it's a growing business. Anything around property services, you'll notice a consistent theme in all 5 of these sectors, and that for the most part, they are all service driven organizations. Within medical and pharmaceutical, that may include both service organizations, but also firms like mine that actually manufacture medical equipment. So whether it's devices or pharmaceuticals, that growth is explosive. In fact, it is the only sector of the economy that has enjoyed significant growth for really the last 10 to 15 years, largely because of advances in healthcare, but also rising in healthcare cost. So these are the industries that really show tremendous growth, but by and large, there's healthy growth in the job market. Now, of course, I can't just leave you with the good news. I have to share some bad news with you. And the bad news, you all know, is that inflation is getting to really get to be excessive. And in fact, it's as high as it's been in the last 40 years. In fact, 40 years ago, the inflation rate was 8.2%. That's exactly where it is today. And the sort of more recent news that I said I was going to share with you earlier is just today, if you followed the morning news, the Fed is meeting. Federal Reserve Bank is meeting, a board is meeting today. And, all the analysts are projecting that they will increase interest rates by another 0.75%. That's significant. That is significant. And they have committed, and you've heard the news stories already, hopefully, that they will keep raising the interest rates until they feel they have inflation under control. That's pretty bold. And it really presents some potential challenges in the job market, because the impact that it's having on employers is that, one, wages are not increasing at the same pace of inflation. So your earning dollar is going less far, and companies are not able to offer compensation levels that are necessary to attract good talent. And I think we'll see some wage deflation, or at least stagnation, over the course of at least the next several months, if not longer. And I think that's going to make it tougher for folks who are looking to move jobs, particularly to find, more attractive salary levels. And as a result of that, companies have to make some difficult choices. Do they look for ways to increase compensation, and in doing so, recognize that will require them in some cases to raise prices, which will likely increase inflation even more? Or, are there ways that they can pass those increased costs onto the customer, which again fuels inflation in another way? So neither of those presents a pretty picture. And so I see this as a real challenge for job growth in the future. And one of the ways in which companies are looking for ways to manage those costs, again, going back to what I said earlier about healthcare earlier, that one of the biggest costs for employers in their sort of benefits package is healthcare. And that cost has been rising on an average of 12% a year for the last several years. And so what are companies doing? They're moving to the gig economy, so the part-time contract outsource work, which is great if you're the kind of person who's looking for that kind of work. But as you can imagine, it comes typically with no benefits. So if you're young and healthy and can afford that kind of job environment, it can be great. But if you have health concerns, or if you're worried about health concerns in the future, gig jobs typically come with some risk, and it's important that we all understand what those risks are. So I'm going to stop Sarah every now and then and pause and see if we have questions. Any questions so far before I move on?
Not yet.
All right, great. So I asked this question to our recruiters, and have done so when I have a chance to connect with people who work in other organizations as well. The question I ask is, hey, what keeps you up at night when you think about the labor market? So here's some interesting statistics that come out of a report called, and we've all heard this, right, over the course of the last year, the Great Resignation. So, on average, this is staggering, I think, 4 million Americans are quitting their jobs each month. Now, what is more interesting about that statistic is that this sense of the Great Resignation represents a pattern that we typically have not seen before in the labor market. Typically, what people would do pre-pandemic, for example, if they were unhappy, they would look for another job. They would wait until they secured that job, and then they would resign and move to the new position. But in fact, that 4 million in any given month who leave their jobs, up to 30% are leaving without a new job in hand. That's pretty remarkable. 30% leaving without a new job. And I think that's a reflection of just the healthy job market and the overall growth we're experiencing. I think people are feeling confident that even if they don't have a job, the market is so robust, they'll be able to secure a job in a reasonably short amount of time. And so far, that has been the case. Whether that continues, particularly in this era of high inflation, for me is very uncertain. And we are seeing a trend of this sort of great return where people are leaving their jobs and recognizing, what, maybe things aren't as good as I thought they were, and then coming back to their former employers. Almost 40% of current employees saying they're looking to quit in the next 6 months or so. 48% have not only looked at new jobs, but also jobs in different industries, which I think speaks to the sort of increased demand that's out there in the workforce. Almost 30% say They're looking for something that that involves more flexibility, particularly from being able to work remotely. That was a decision I made a little over a year ago. So I, like everybody else in March of 2020, everyone on my team and in our organization, unless you were in a manufacturing role, went home. And then about 4 months, 5 months later, even though we were still in the midst of the pandemic, my company wanted employees to come back. And listen, if any of you are from LA or have been to LA, you know that we have this interesting phenomenon here. I'm not sure they have it in other parts of the country. They call it traffic. Once I got used to working from home, and I used to have an hour-and-a-half commute each way. And once I got used to working from home, I could not go back. So I actually left my job in September last year and particularly pursued only companies that had either a hybrid structure or even preferably 100% remote, which is where I am now. And it has been wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Now, I have also said that if you follow the news around DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know that since George Floyd's murder in May of 2020, many organizations have ratcheted up their focus on diversity and equity and inclusion. I think that's good news in general for companies. It's good news for society. What is also meant is that if you happen to be either a person of color or a woman, that this increased in diversity and inclusion focus has really sort of been a great boon for diversity populations. And in fact, I often say there's never been a better time in the job market than to be representative of a diverse group, women or people of color. I certainly see that. I get a lot more hits on my LinkedIn profile than I ever did before, this surge in diversity focus. So that's where we are today, and these are the things that recruiters often tell me they're concerned about. Indeed has a research team that they call the Hiring Lab, where they look at labor trends in the marketplace. And here's some things that they have said in a very recent report. So in asking and answering the question about how long could this hot market continue, their feeling is from a short-term perspective, we're likely to see continuing bargaining power from the perspective of the employee or the job seeker. In other words, we still hold the power. They're not sure how long that's going to continue, but at least they say for the time being, things look pretty good if you are a job seeker. And again, COVID, who knows what's happening in COVID? Since I work in healthcare, I often have a chance to read about sort of where we are and what to expect. And, there's some concern now that maybe a new strain of COVID may be out there that may be even more virulent and even less resistant to vaccines. So who knows what that might mean for us and how that might impact the job market. But ultimately, what they're saying essentially is that they really see the job market will be pretty robust for, at the very least, the rest of the year. So let me pause there before I jump into some more specifics and see if there are any questions that have come through, or if anybody would like to ask a question, because I'm going to move now from sort of the bigger sort of picture and landscape of the job market to some very, very concrete, specific advice. Any questions, Sarah?
Not in the chat yet.
All right, perfect. All righty, so here's the meat of what I'd like to share with you. Again, I look at this from the perspective of a hiring manager and really reflecting on both the candidates I've seen that have really done the most effective job in presenting themselves to me as a prospective employer, but also things that I've tried to really incorporate into my own style, my own approach when it comes to pursuing job opportunities that specifically those ones I really want to go after. So the first part may seem basic, but I can't tell you how many times I have interviewed candidates who really don't seem to understand this piece. So ultimately, and this is my strongest belief, as a job seeker, you have tremendous influence, tremendous power, particularly in this hot market, to really present yourself in the best possible light. But all too often, I have to say, I see candidates who really look good on paper. They've got outstanding resume. They may have engaged with a resume writer to help them put together this flawless resume. And they've got a good LinkedIn profile. Maybe they have worked also with a LinkedIn profile consultant. I actually did a few years ago and found that consultant to be quite helpful. But somehow when they show up, I'm not always as impressed. So here's some advice I would always say when it comes to pursuing a job that you might be interested in. So look at the job secondarily in terms of your overall approach. Start with yourself. Make sure that you have a good and thorough self-assessment that reflects who you are, what your strengths are, what your values are, what you bring to the table. I like to encourage folks to think of a unique value proposition that they bring to a prospective employer. What do I mean by that? So one of the favorite questions I like to ask as a employer, and I still ask this today, it literally is this. I will say, listen, we have got a really strong applicant pool for this job, and I'm really happy. And frankly, I'm finding it a little bit of a challenge to figure out who do we go with. So it would help me if you could help me understand why I should hire you. I just love that question. It really gets people thinking about, really stretching to not just provide some general responses. Well, I'm good at communication, or I'm really good at leading teams, or I'm good at strategic thinking. I'm really trying to get to what makes them different. What makes them different, even though they don't know, obviously, the other candidates that I'm interviewing. I'm asking them essentially to think about how they assess themselves relative to others that are in the marketplace that really allow them to stand out or make them different. For example, typically when I'm answering that question, I will usually talk about a couple of things. One, that I have this unique combination of a psychology undergraduate and an MBA. And I think that gives me a deeper understanding of how people work and how people can impact business outcomes, and how through leadership and effective leadership, because I've worked most of my time in the leadership development space, I can help leaders develop strategies and build skills that allow them to maximize motivation and therefore contribute to higher productivity levels, all in ways that contribute to increased business results. And so that's my sort of elevator speech around the value that I bring. The other thing I often say is because I have an MBA, unlike a lot of my other HR colleagues, for example, I am very comfortable speaking to senior executives about the business. I can read income statements and balance sheets and be able to understand what they mean. I can understand market dynamics and help sort of employees understand what makes our company or this company unique in the marketplace. So I talk about those things that allow me, and again, I feel very confident about this, in the space that I work in, which is in HR, to really differentiate myself from other colleagues who really don't have necessarily that business background. So that's what I mean by a unique value proposition. And the key to being able to not only understand what that is, but to articulate it in a job interview, for example, is to really be able to craft a story. That's one of the favorite questions I like to ask. My most favorite question I like to ask, and it's the first question I typically ask when we start the interview. And literally I say, look, I've got your resume. I've looked at it. I don't need you to rehash it for me. And I'll literally turn it over if they're in person, and I'll make the gesture that I'm turning it over if it's virtual. But I say, look, just tell me about yourself. And that's it. That's the question. And I cannot tell you how many people struggle with that question. Or if they start the question by saying something like, well, I'm from Los Angeles. I've got 2 brothers and a sister, and I really enjoy hiking and playing tennis, and I play a couple of musical instruments. Now, it's great, fine, but that doesn't help. It really doesn't. What I want candidates to do is to grab that question and control it. And one of the ways I like to answer the question And literally, I will say this. I would say, well, first of all, I like to talk about what brought me to meet you and to explore this opportunity. And I'll tell my story about, again, the psychology of the MBA combination, about how I focused my career in really developing some deep knowledge and expertise in leadership development, how I've worked with world-class companies like State Farm Insurance, like Kaiser Permanente, like the Cheesecake Factory. And I have really learned and honed in on the definitive best practices for doing this kind of work. And I have been able to gain the credibility and trust and confidence of the leaders I've supported in ways that allow me to bring and add value to an organization. And I'm very confident that those experiences will allow me to make a strong contribution to your organization. So I don't need to hear all the life stories and all the personal upbringings. I want people to cut to the chase, but to do so in a way that is just not biographical, but that tells a story by bringing in different elements of your experiences, your education, your unique skills, make you stand out in the marketplace, and to put it together in a smooth and seamless story. That really is the first part of maximizing your skill sets and experience and really truly leveraging your strengths. Then, once you've done that piece, and only after you've done that piece, then you go after prospective employers. And even there, I have some very specific advice about your approach. Rather than just use the mass market approach and go and look to see what's out there, I really think it's important to zero in on the places that you think you really want to work, whether that be a specific industry or a specific firm that you've read about and admire, maybe a firm that aligns with your own interests and passions, the things that are important to you, your values. Really be very specific. I've seen lots of great job opportunities, and I'll just give a couple of examples. You know, again, I think I'm really strong when it comes to leadership development, and I get, like many of you, I'm sure, headhunters reaching out saying, "Hey, would you like to talk?" And there's certain firms I just won't talk to. I won't talk to investment firms. And listen, I've got nothing against investments. I have investments, but it's not the kind of industry where I think, at least for me, aligns with my values. If you look at my, my profile or resume, you'll see that, other than this one little stint at the Cheesecake Factory, I was working for companies that were really mission driven: healthcare, transportation, financial, State Farm Insurance. So, all of those firms, that what they had in common is they were all doing things for, if you will, the greater good. Cheesecake Factory, simply, I just like their cheesecake. It's not a good reason to go and work for an employer. It did happen to be at the time, and still is, one of the best 100 companies to work for in America in the rating. So it literally is a great place to work, and I had a wonderful time there. But I tend to focus in terms of my own job search on firms where I think there's a good connection to what's really important for me, and what that business is all about. And make sure you really are intentional about looking for those roles really most strongly aligned with what you bring to the table. And the ideal world, for example, again, we're not using paper as much anymore, but the analogy I like to make is, the job you're looking for is a strong fit. If you can print the job description and lay it down, and then print your resume and overlay it onto the job description, and if you see a strong fit with your skills, with your passions, your values, your experience, then yes, it is a strong fit, and you really ought to go after it. So, now having, again, worked in this space for about 20 years, whenever I am pursuing opportunities, I am being very, very intentional. I'm not using a mass market approach. It's too time consuming. It's too labor intensive. What I will do is really think long and hard as I read a job description. I will highlight, where do the job responsibilities that at least are articulated here most closely aligned to my experience and my skills. And if I see by looking at that piece of paper is more yellow than white, yeah, that's a good sign. Maybe this is something I'm going to really go after. And when I go after it, and I'll talk about this in a later slide, If it's a really good fit, I'm going to go after it very, very deliberately and very, very hard. And I'll talk about what that means in just a bit. But again, let me pause here and see if there are any questions, Sarah, before we move on.
Yeah, there's one that came through the DM, and this one is, what specific tips do you have for older job seekers in today's market?
Yes. Well, maybe this is the time, Sarah, I'm going to reveal exactly how old I am. I can actually speak to that because I would say, despite what I hope is my youthful appearance, I'm actually 66. So I can speak to that with great example. And if that questioner will hold off for just a moment, I'll come back and answer that question, because I think in my example, you'll see the approach that I have taken. So hold that, and if I miss it, Sarah, please remind me, or that questioner, please revisit it. So before I move on, I just want to share what I think is a great resource for anyone who's looking to really do that first piece of work in terms of that self-assessment. One of the assessments I use in a lot of my work is called the Strengths Finder. It is one of the most widely used self-assessments in the world, in fact. It's offered in many different languages. It is an assessment that's designed to help you really understand the strengths that you bring to your roles, to your work, to your career. And I find it a great starting point, being able to, again, craft that story. For example, my own strengths profile tells me that there are 3 things about me that I have eventually been able to weave into my story. One, it tells me I'm strategic. I'm good and effective, and I'm energized by thinking about the long term. So as I craft my story, I talk about how I can bring leadership development solutions in ways that drive longer term outcomes and allow leaders to improve their capabilities to advance and contribute to the organization. It tells me I'm a learner. And when I talk about my learner strength, what I talk about is that I am a fast learner. I'm a quick study. And when you look at my career history, you see that I have moved into radically different industries, from healthcare to insurance to restaurants and transportation. Those industries are very different. In each of those roles, I was able to use my learner strength to figure out what I needed to know, understand who I needed to know, and really be able to research and understand the dynamics of the industry and allow me to make a contribution quickly to that organization. So again, anything you can do to assess yourself and be able to weave that self-assessment into your story, I think is a really super approach. So,
hey, Mike, can I pause you
yes.
right there? There is a question
Sure.
that goes back to what you were just saying. So the question is, what would you recommend to those who are looking to switch careers or industries where your skills may not overlap as much? So that career pivot that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a great question. I will take that one now. First of all, it is my belief that unless there are specific industries where the skill set or even the education requirements are very specific, in many ways, skills are transferable. And I think oftentimes it's a matter, for example, I can't be a doctor, so I'm probably not going to, make that career switch. I'm not going to be an architect or an engineer. But I like to encourage people to think about the broader skill set required and to really zero in on those skill sets where you think there's clearly some transferability, and to really highlight those, not only in the ways you articulate yourself in an interview, but even previously, even before then, how you can make some of those things stand out in your resume. One of the things that I have in my resume, not in my LinkedIn profile, but it starts with a whole section on competencies. And with there, I highlight probably about 15 competencies, from presentation skills to strategic thinking to business acumen to financial analysis to platform skills to instructional design, which is a piece of work that I do in my profession. So when I think about those skill sets, they're transferable to any industry, any sector. So again, through that self-assessment, think about just making that list of your skills in general, not thinking about the industry per se. Then ask yourself the question, to what extent are those skills transferable? Now, you can't do anything, I shouldn't say you can't do anything. If there's certain skill sets that are absolutely required, then and then you have to get them in some way. Sometimes their certifications can help with that. I'll give you one example. One of the things I was seeing in the job market in my field was a lot of jobs focusing or at least requiring some level of design thinking, which I think is a fascinating concept that really is in the marketing space. So I was so intrigued by that I actually went and got myself a design thinking certification and proudly highlight that on my resume. So if it's a skill that you think is really needed and you don't have it, look for ways to do it. And the great thing about learning skills is you can learn them in lots of ways. You can learn them by being involved in a professional association. You can learn them by getting involved in the community. I'm on a board now, a nonprofit board, and I'm as part of that work asked to do things that are not necessarily part of my history. But I read and I've talked to other people and I've tried to do things to help me build that muscle as best I can. So I tend to be on the positive side here and really encourage people to, again, highlight as best they can their most transferable skills. And then, what I do is when I don't have that, I say, look, I'm a quick study, I'm a learner. So I'm confident I can learn those skills. And I know how to learn, if you will. Hopefully that answers that question.
Great.
So
yeah.
Let me talk about the difference between a passive and active job search, and I'll give an example. I'll come back to that. What do we old folks do in the job search market? And then I'll open it fully up for questions. So most people, I think, do the passive job search. So, they have their LinkedIn profile, they may have an Indeed profile or resume, and they just respond to ads. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, right? But recognize two things. One, it's a numbers game. So everybody else is looking at those same ads. They're responding as you do, and it can be hard to get your resume or your profile in the door. These days, most companies that are medium or large in size, even nonprofit organizations, are using what's called applicant tracking systems. So your resume in the first screen may never be seen by a real person. They're going to be screened by a platform, a technology. And so unless that technology sees words and phrases in there that align with the job, your resume will even never see the light of day. I see, I as someone who manages that in my own company, I may have 300 people who apply for a job, but the tracking system that goes to recruiters only services 25. I'll never see those others, and that's the way most sizable companies are managing their applicant pools these days. You may go directly to the company website and look for jobs and apply that way. Again, nothing wrong with that, but it's a numbers game. The other challenge is not every job is posted. In fact, the majority of jobs in organizations aren't even posted. We even gain access to that applicant pool or that search opportunity, that labor pool. I always advocate for a more active search. That's certainly what I've done in my career. And again, I'll give some examples, particularly as it relates to the challenge that older job candidates face. I think networking is always good. If you can meet people and make personal connections, whether those be live events, whether they be virtual events, always great. I am always active in networking. People really, I think, I can't sell enough the value of information interviews. These are just meetings you set up with people that you've had a chance to meet. You're not inquiring about a job per se, but you're really going in there to ask questions about the company, about the profession, about the industry. And this kind of speaks to, how do you make those connections when the skills maybe not be prevalent? Asking in the information interviews, how important are those skills? And what advice would you have for me on how I can acquire those skills to make myself more transferable? Great approach. In-person career fairs, if they're available. And all kinds of networking opportunities are out there, whether it's chambers of commerce, public, charitable organizations like Rotary and Kiwanis. I mean, there are a lot of organizations out there. In my field, there's a couple of professional associations. One is called SHRM, the Society of Human Resources Management. I network actively through that group. I've been involved in leadership roles in that group as well. I've highlighted here the last two because I really want to stress those. Boy, there's not a better networking tool than LinkedIn that's out there. And look at these folks who are on the call right now. We've got, according to my list, 27. That obviously includes us, Sarah and Nicole. So that's 24 of you. I don't know if you know each other, but there's an opportunity right now to leverage each other as part of your network and anyone else who is in your alumni network. As Sarah knows, I saw her just a couple weeks ago when I was there for my reunion, and met lots of great folks that I hadn't seen in a lot of time. Now, I'm not in a position where I think I need to leverage them for job search purposes, but boy, I wouldn't hesitate if all of a sudden I was in a situation where I needed to reach out to some of them and say, hey, who do you know? Even though I don't have a relationship with them, and in just about most cases, I hadn't seen most of them in 45 years. But so let me speak to that. Here's some tips that I would say. I'll get through this. I'll go back to the old folks search strategy. I can say that with some humility now because I'm one of them. I would never say that when I was younger. So this advice I always give, particularly if you're serious about your job search. There's the LinkedIn regular free version, but then there's the LinkedIn Premium. If you really serve a serious, invest in LinkedIn Premium. It's a chunk to commit to every month, but boy, it gets your resume out there, your profile out there more strongly, and is more likely to get hits from recruiters. Because just as you are thinking about a more active job search strategy, employers are doing the same thing. They're not waiting for prospective candidates to come to them. They're actually going after them and looking up profiles and inviting people to have a conversation. Make sure your profile is tight, make sure it's strong, make sure it's in, and when you sign up for premium, you'll get some advice on how to do that. The headline is probably the most important thing. You want to really upgrade because that's the first thing employers will see. And that's going to prompt them to reach out to you and have a conversation. And reach out to folks and ask them if they'd be willing to recommend you on your profile and say some good words about your skills and your experience and your achievements. You can set up alerts so that daily or weekly, you'll receive notifications about jobs in your particular field. I have 2 alerts that I have set up for myself. One as executive coach, because I do a lot of that kind of work, and the other as a leadership facilitator. And so that helps me identify roles that I don't have to necessarily look for. They just pop up in my daily feed. And I was talking to Sarah before we started. These last 2 pieces are things I really am quite adamant about. Listen, it is so easy just to invite someone to become a LinkedIn connection. If you're really serious, be a little bit more strategic. Don't just go after anyone. I can tell you right now that of the thousands of people that are my LinkedIn connections, there are probably several hundred I don't even know. I was actually on an interview just a couple of days ago where someone said, "Oh, you know Brian?" And I said, "No, who is Brian?" She said, "Well, he's one of your LinkedIn connections." Well, I said, I'm sorry. I may have met him at some event years ago, but I don't know Brian. Now, maybe that means that's bad on me because I'm accepting invitations to people I don't even know. But clearly, what I always like to advise when you're connecting with someone, don't just hit the connect button. Take the time and type a message that says, "Hello, Mike. I had a chance to meet you at the professional development series session you facilitated. Really intrigued by your comments and would love to have the opportunity to connect with you and sort of tap your expertise or pick your brain." People are bombarded with requests all the time. And again, you don't have to do this with everyone, but if there's someone you really want to build a connection to, make the effort to put in a more focused request. And then if there are organizations you really want to go after, then I'll share with you a technique that I use in these next 2 slides, and then I'll open it up. So here's what I mean by being proactive. Let's say you go out there and you see an opportunity that you're interested in, you apply for it, but you want to go beyond applying and try to really get your foot in the door. So this is actually a message I sent to the CEO of a firm called Anderon. Anderon is a professional development firm, and they were looking for someone to serve as a coach and faculty member full time. Well, I am, my age already, so I'm actually in my point in my career trying to transition into a contract, part-time worker. I'm not ready to retire, but I am ready to move away from the 9 to 5 situation. So this is the actual message I sent her. in two-lane spirit in green, I highlighted in green the things that I would want to call to your attention. So I wrote the CEO of the firm, and I said, her name is Jenny. I said, hey, look, you don't know me, I don't know you. I really hope that we can rectify that. But I want you to know I'm really interested in joining your firm. I highlighted the thing, but again, I think is my value proposition. I've got 20 years of experience in the fields of talent leadership development. They're with companies that are tops in their respective industries. And I wanted to provide some context to let her know that I'm looking to move from full-time to contract, and that I really love this work, coaching and facilitation. I wanted her to know I did some research on her company. I looked at the website, and I'm confident I can make a strong contribution, and that I'd love to have an opportunity to connect with you. And maybe this sounds a little bit overly confident, but I actually say I'm confident that this will be a good investment in your time and mine. And listen, I will tell you in full transparency, when I do this, I would say 2 out of 10 times I get even a response. It doesn't stop me from doing it, because every now and then I get a response like this. So Jenny writes back and says, wow, thanks so much for taking the time to reach out. I like that you've researched our firm and you like what you see. Now, when someone says I have a CV, that tells me that person is probably European and not American. Doesn't matter, but it's a piece of information that's useful. But she says, look, are you interested in contract work or full-time employment? Now, I thought I made that clear in my message, but she asked the question anyway. And she says, by the way, we also are looking for a VP of leadership development. Well, I didn't know that. That position is not posted. This was kind of an accidental discovery. And the reason I share this is that it points out the reality is you never know what's going to happen if you take an approach like this. Again, in the worst case scenario, what I see is I get no response whatsoever. But every now and then I get responses like this, which give me some encouragement. Now, granted, I don't do this for every job, but I was very attracted to this organization. I think they've got a great product. I think they have a unique place in the marketplace. And it's a place where I genuinely felt I could come in and really be successful and make a contribution. So when all of those things align, I will make the effort to be a little bit more proactive and go after a firm. And like I say, most of the times I get absolutely no response. But every now and then I get a response like this, which says, well, for me at least, it's worth the effort. Let me go back and answer the last question. We'll open it up, Sarah. So there are a couple of things that I do with regard to trying to address the reality of age discrimination. And I'm going to take the liberty here just to share my profile, just to provide more of a illustration or an example of how I do this. Now, I work in HR, right? And anyone who works in HR will tell you we cannot discriminate against age. Anyone in HR also will tell you that age discrimination does happen in the organization. So whoever that questioner was, one of the things you'll note about my profile is that it ends with my experience at State Farm Insurance Companies, which began in 2002. That's exactly 20 years. Have I been working more than 20 years? I've been working for 45 years. But I recognize if I put my other experience in here, it's going to signal, oh, this is an old guy. And maybe there are some firms that will say, I'm not sure I want to invest in that person. The beauty of LinkedIn, and the same thing with my resume also ends with State Farm. I want to be very intentional about sort of presenting myself, at least to get my foot in the door for the interview without any concerns about, gee, this is an old guy. So in reference to my experiences as a student, I also don't mention in my profile or in my resume when I graduated. If I put in 1977, you don't have to be a math major to figure out that that was a long time ago. So that's just one of the things that I do. Now, if I get my foot in the door, that's a different story. If I feel that an employer has demonstrated some real interest in who I am and what I have to offer, then the age issue seems to be, at least it has been in my experience, less relevant. My current employer, where I started working last year, knows and knew all along how old I was once I got into the interview stage. He did not know when they were looking at my resume and profile. That's one of the things. And then the other thing that I can also share once I'm in a position to do so is that age and experience still allows me to make a great contribution. The other thing I think it's important to know is because of this tight labor market, employers are willing to consider candidates who maybe they wouldn't have considered 2-5 years ago who are older. In fact, there was a great article in Harvard Business Review talking about trends in terms of hiring people over 65 in the workforce, and it's increasing because the labor market is getting tighter and tighter. All right, so Sarah, any questions, comments in the chat box?
Yes, Mike, this has been so helpful. So one question is, can you comment on aligning personality type, extroverted versus introverted, when interviewing and working on job search?
Yeah, that's great. So, well, first of all, I want to be clear. Make sure I'm clear about introversion, extroversion in general, what that means. I always like to refer to an instrument that's called the Myers-Briggs. So I don't know if the questioner is asking about that or whether the more traditional definitions. First of all, I will say you can think about roles and which roles might be more suitable to someone who is either introverted and extroverted. Sales jobs obviously would naturally seem to imply that you probably should have some extroversion in your personality. Research skills or research jobs, probably where you're locked up doing research, might imply introversion. I would discourage folks from being restrictive in that regard, because once you begin to learn about introversion and extroversion, you begin to understand it's a preference. It's not a restriction or limitation. So, by the way, just for your information, on the Myers-Briggs, I score off the charts on introversion. Most people meet me and they say, how can that be? Work that you do is very extrovert driven. And that is correct. But again, I am not defined by my type or my personality. And so here's what that means. If I'm doing and I'm not doing anything in person anymore, but in the days when I was doing on-site workshops, I might have a 1-day or a 2-day workshop, and I would be up on my feet facilitating all day, teaching content, facilitating discussion, and doing it very well. But by the end of the day, as an introvert, I would be exhausted. So I didn't let my personality, style, and preference determine the work that I did. Just meant that I had to adjust my style to be effective. And for me, here's what that looked like. If you study introversion in the Myers-Briggs, it says it's not about being socially uncomfortable or not liking people, but it's about getting your energy from ideas and concepts and tools and frameworks and models. So what I would do is talk about concepts and models and tools and frameworks in ways that were energizing for me, also resulted in them being energizing for my audiences. And that's how I got through it. And it just happened that there were people in the room that were also willing to sort of engage me in this analysis or thinking about concepts, frameworks, and tools. So please don't limit your job or career search to those roles that you think are more traditionally introvert or extrovert. Again, start with your skills first and foremost. And the beauty of work is that you can learn to adjust your style in ways that align with the work requirements. And ultimately, the question I would always ask you to focus on, do you think you could be effective doing the work from a skills and experience standpoint? And if the answer is yes, the personality thing will just sort of work its way through.
Sorry about that noise. Okay, great. So we've got 3 more questions. I know we've got about 5 more minutes. So just
okay.
In your opinion, what makes a strong LinkedIn headline?
And this is the advice I got from my LinkedIn consultant. I mentioned I had reached out to someone about 5 years ago, and he said, don't write a paragraph. Highlight the things that you want to stress. And so this headline for me, I didn't have before. I had a, sort of a paragraph that described who I was. So he said, zero in on the things, and here's the kind of creative part. They can be things that aren't necessarily things that you do now, but the things that you want to do down the road. So he said, also use very descriptive language. So this is my headline. So I started off right in the back with passionate. And by the way, hopefully even in this session here, you can observe they have a lot of passion around this work. And I really do. I am excited about this profession that I'm in around, sort of development, the labor market, all these things. So passionate, talent, professional. I had the word leader before, but now I use the word professional. So much of this is about the words that you choose. Obviously, I want to highlight my leadership development, facilitation, and coach. Those are my top two sort of career specialties that I want to make sure to market myself to prospective employers always. Now, this DEI champion, I didn't have before. Now, look, I always say to people, I've never really worked in DEI before, but I've been diverse for a long time. But over the last couple of years, I have been thrown into supporting D&I initiatives because obviously I'm a person of color. So I call myself a champion. Again, that word champion really for me says something. So I have some experience in assessments. I mentioned Myers-Briggs earlier, StrengthsFinder. I'm certified in several assessments. I want prospective employers to know that. I've done a lot of consulting work. I've got an MBA from a good school, so I want to stress not just business acumen, but strong business acumen. And again, my StrengthsFinder tells me I'm a strategic thinker. So that language is reflective of a combination of my strengths, where I see it myself as very different and standing out. It uses certain words to evoke messages like passionate and champion. And it highlights the areas where I think I have a competitive advantage in the marketplace, which are in executive coaching and facilitation. So if you've got a headline that's just a descriptive paragraph of who you are and what you've done, I would say chunk it up into shorter words that really highlight the things you want to stand out. Because when recruiters go into LinkedIn on their end, they're going to command their searches based on your headline first. And then they'll dig deeper to see more about who you are.
Oh, that's great. So the next question is, as the parent of a college senior who relies on Indeed and job boards almost exclusively, what incentives can I offer my student in terms of getting out there and networking?
Wow, that's a good one. What incentives? Well, again, I think it's one of those incentives that you can articulate, but it's hard for a young person to really realize until they see the benefits. Again, sharing what I shared earlier about the difference between a passive and an active search. But again, you don't really understand the benefits of that approach, and when all of a sudden you start getting some hits, say at the very least, try to communicate to that young person what the benefits would be with a more effective approach. I know, for example, I tell my 21 and 24-year-old kids, and if you do the math, you recognize, obviously, I started late with a family. I tell them at dinner, hey, I got a call today from a headhunter. And so I think they know instinctively that, just by hearing dad talk about, oh, people are contacting him, there's something going on there that probably makes sense. So I'd say talk about the benefits, but it's going to probably be hard for that person to truly understand the benefits until they see it actually playing itself out. But make a bet. Well, look, if you try these things and they work, let's make a bet. If you win and you get no hits, then I owe you this. And if I win and all of a sudden you start getting some hits, you have to do the housework and do the dishes and do whatever you need to do or you want them to do for the next month. So make a friendly wager.
I love that. All right, final question, and then we'll wrap up. So it's statement and then a question. I've noticed that many organizations require lengthy aptitude and personality tests. This person is in sales.
That is an increasing trend, by the way. Yes.
So then it says sometimes up to 2 hours in length prior to an interview.
Yeah.
In your opinion, are these worth taking when in a proactive job search?
I would always say yes to that, because increasingly, as I said, more and more companies are using these, and they are a screening factor, unfortunately. But ultimately, they also are an increasingly requirement for these firms just to, again, get your foot in the door. But it's definitely worth doing. And here's a piece of advice I always like to give when it comes to taking those assessments. If you're reasonably savvy, you start looking at the questions, you can pretty much figure out what they're trying to assess. But I would say don't get hung up in trying to pick the right answers or give the company you think the things that they want to hear. Answer the questions candidly and honestly based on your true self. In most cases, and I really believe this, they're not used to say either yes, you are qualified or no, you're not, but they're used to kind of give them a sense of who you are, what your style is, what your strengths are, as a way to really begin to think about how can we best leverage this person in our organization. But yes, absolutely, I would say, particularly if it's an organization you're very interested in, it takes time to go through this stuff, but it's definitely worth doing.
Awesome. With that, I know we're a minute over. Mike, thank you for your time. I don't know if you can see the chat, but there's so much just great feedback.
Let me open it up. Great, love to hear that. Love to hear that.
Very grateful for your time.
My pleasure.
Two wrap-ups. One,
Yep.
I'm assuming you would like people to reach you on LinkedIn, but what is the best way for people to contact you after this? And then close us out.
Yeah, here's what I would say. You know, I don't look at LinkedIn nearly as much as I look at email. But for everybody in the call, Sarah knows how to reach me. If you're really interested, and let me put that word really in there, I don't need more LinkedIn connections. I really don't. I'm very comfortable with what I have right now. But if you think I can provide you with some support, if you think I can be useful to you, I am happy to do that. That is the obligation, I believe, that comes with anyone who finishes from Tulane University. So I would say if you're interested in connecting, reach out to Sarah, ask her for my email address. And Sarah, you have permission to anyone who reaches out to pass that information on. And I would welcome hearing from you. But don't just send me a LinkedIn invitation. I got a lot of those.
Perfect. All right. With that, you want to wrap us up with some final thoughts, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah. Again, right now, I think you are in the driver's seat. The job market is hot. Recruiters are panicked. The labor market's tight. People are leaving like more than before. So I think we're in a good position. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. It all depends on how this inflation sort of trend and decisions are impacting the market. But certainly right now, really, if you're looking, be thoughtful and intentional about making sure to position yourself in the best possible light. I think if you put in the effort, it will certainly pay off.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for the conversation. And we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.